Feels really good to be back. And because I'm back, today we're doing my unfiltered review of the Mavic 3. And because this video is going to hit a new level of people and people that may have never discovered this channel before, I want to give you a standard disclaimer. My channel is not intended for children. My channel is geared towards adults that can handle strong language and opinions. If you are easily offended or somebody who cannot handle any level of strong language, you've been warned. And if you comment about it down below, I'm going to simply tell you, I don't give a f***. So with that being said, let's get started.
Now on the day I was born, the nurses all gathered round, and they gazed in wide wonder at the joy they had found. The head nurse spoke up, said, "Leave this one alone." She could tell right away that I was bad to the bone, bad to the bone, bad to the bone, bad, bad, bad to the bone. I broke 1,000 hearts before I met you. I'll break 1,000 more, baby, before I am through. I wanna be yours, pretty baby, yours and yours alone. I'm here to tell you, honey, that I'm bad to the bone, bad to the bone, bad, 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 bad to the bone.
What's good, everybody? Ken here. You're watching Original Dobo. Today, we talk about my unfiltered thoughts on the Mavic 3. Now, just also to add on to that, I'm going to be coming at this as somebody who purchased this drone. Yes, I own a portion of DroneWorks, which is a drone distribution. However, even though I grab these off the shelf, they still cost me money. Every time I crash one, every time I pull one off the shelf, it costs me whatever we paid our distributors for these drones. So I look at this just like any of you that have purchased this. Is it worth the money? These are $2,100 when you break it all down. Is it worth it for the base version? I'm not even talking about the Cine version. I'm just talking about the base Mavic 3. With that said, let's discuss the build quality. Okay, so the build quality of the Mavic 3 is something that sort of caught me by surprise. When I first unboxed this drone, I felt like it just didn't feel quite as solid as the Mavic 2 Pro or even the Air 2S. It just didn't feel as rigid or robust. But after using it for a couple of days, I gotta say, I don't think I'm really concerned with it all that much anymore. It's just more or less this top portion that just sort of threw me off. It just doesn't sound quite as rigid. Take a listen. Almost sounds hollow. Now again, that's a trivial thing to discuss, but it's just something I wanted to bring up. Now, the overall design of this looks amazing. They did a great job with the revision of the Mavic 3. I love its bulldog stance. It almost looks mean. It looks like it's just here to film shit and get a job done. It's much more of a professional look in the Mavic 3 than it was in the Mavic 2 Pro. Also, they put air vents all over the place on this so you can get maximum cooling so you don't have to worry about this unit overheating. I really like that. There's also obstacle avoidance in 360 degrees on this unit, which I think is amazing, and it makes for a pleasant flight experience. Now, I did go ahead and crash this when I was in Hawaii, and it fell from about 12 feet high onto a railroad track. Now, when I first ran up to it and it was on the ground, I had a leg that was bent completely backwards and I was able to pop it back into its joint. More so, the gimbal was all jacked up and I was getting vibrations. But after talking to a friend, I think it was like the second or third day after crashing it, he pointed out to the fact that my gimbal wasn't in the stabilizer bracket and that I should just be able to pop it back into place. Sure enough, I was able to pop it back into place and the gimbal stopped vibrating and it basically saved my trip. So much so that I didn't even unbox the secondary unit that arrived to me when I was on the Big Island. I ended up selling that to 808 State. So I never even had to unbox it. So this unit here that I'm using and been flying is this very same unit that I crashed. So as far as durability goes, I think it's gonna be okay, providing you don't fall from a super high height or onto a relatively hard concrete surface. I think it's gonna be able to sustain, you know, some minor damage, which this did pretty good. I got some superficial scratches on it, but beyond that, it's holding up really excellent. The battery design is also pretty unique. Now the batteries slide into the backside. I sort of like that. I think that is a good design. I also like how you have to give it a firm click to know that it's in place. I think that's a lot better than the previous generation where the batteries went up top. The SD card slot and USB-C port has also been relocated to the backside. To me, this is a love-hate battle because I'm constantly having to take the battery out just to be able to get to the SD card. Now, it's a trivial thing to complain about pulling a battery out to get the SD card slot out, but it's just something that I didn't have to deal with the previous drone. So if I want to hot swap, you know, SD cards because maybe an SD card was full, I'm not going to be able to do that quite as easily because I now have to power the drone out if I don't have something to get in there and get that out. The motors are all blacked out on this unit, which I think is pretty cool. I sort of like these blacked out motors. They look neat. I mean, they're not, it's nothing practical with the color. I just like that it's a little bit darker, just adds to that meaner appearance. The props also have these rubber soft tips. I don't know if they did that so it wouldn't cause bodily harm to anything or anyone, but the tips of these are softer, so if you do smack something, they're not getting all chipped up like the previous generation props would. Now the gimbal sticks out quite tremendously. This camera unit is quite large and bulbous, and this is going to be your most fragile part of this unit. If you wreck and you hit this gimbal straight on, it's going to pop it out of the stabilizer or even at worst case, break the gimbal. I've already scratched this clear ND filter, so luckily enough, they didn't do what they did with the Air 2S where they didn't have any filter on it at all. If I would have did that to the Air 2S, no doubt it would have scratched the main lens and it would probably render that camera useless. But because this actually has a UV filter on here, I'm able to swap that out or buy a new UV filter. But the scratch is just enough out of the view of the iris where I don't have to worry about that whatsoever. All right, let's go ahead and talk about battery life on this drone. Okay, these are the 5,000 milliamp hour batteries that come with the DJI Mavic 3. And in my experience, after flying this for about 4 weeks, I'm getting about 38 to 36 minutes of continuous flight time out of this. Now, battery life is always going to be situational, and it's gonna really depend on where you live as to how well the battery is going to last. If you're in a higher altitude or a windier situation, the battery may not last quite as long. I found myself on the cusp of like 36 minutes in reality when I was in Kauai just because it was super windy, we were in the mountains, and there was a lot of elements really playing a factor on the battery life. But what I did find was I can finish one shoot and have just enough battery to start my second shoot. So it was almost like I had 5 or 6 batteries with me, even though I only brought 3 batteries, which is nice because with the Mavic 2 Pro or the Air 2S, I wouldn't be able to do that quite confidently, especially with being out over water where you need to know that you have enough of battery life to sustain any winds. So definitely a big up from that. Now, the battery charging situation on this is sort of weird because they give you, at least on the Fly More combo, they give you this little plate where you stick all the batteries in. Now, the first night that I started charging these, like an idiot, I started charging these and didn't have the battery plate connected to the correct USB port. And because of that, the batteries took forever to charge. I thought there was something wrong. Then I looked at the plate and realized, well, wait a second. There's a wired USB-C cord. Shouldn't I be connected to that? Once I connected to that, I was able to fast charge again. And with 65 watts of charging, it takes about 90 minutes per battery to charge. So roughly about 3 hours for all the batteries to fully charge. And yeah, we were good to go again for the day. It is nice to have that wall wart versus this big hunky power brick. It's incredible that they're able to get that much power into these batteries from just a small power adapter like that. I think that's pretty cool. All right. Let's talk about overall longevity of these, if these are going to suffer the same fate as the Mavic 2 Pro. And unfortunately, it's going to be too soon to tell. Now, these batteries are just as expensive, if not more expensive than the original version. But looking these over, I think DJI took some safety precautions to make sure that these do not expand in the same fashion that we saw from the original Mavic 2 Pro batteries. The Mavic 2 Pro batteries didn't have any supports to contain the lithium ions from expanding at the bottom, and because of that, people were strapping, you know, duct tape and zip ties on their Mavic 2 Pros when they would take off, because in fear that the battery would swell and push it completely out of the drone. But with these batteries, we don't have that concern, and 5,000 milliamp hours are a hell of a lot smaller than what I have on my Evo 2 Pro, and it just makes for a much more efficient design. I don't have any complaints whatsoever with the batteries other than that they're fucking expensive, and that's inflation for you. What are you gonna do, right? But battery life, if I'm done rambling, is pretty damn good on the Mavic 3. All right, let's talk about performance. Okay, performance of the Mavic 3. Well, it crushes the X Dynamics Evolve. That's $3,600. All right, that's it for performance. It's fucking better than that.
I heard they checking for me, no one checking on me, so I had to go.
I'm joking. We're gonna really talk about the performance, and the performance is really, really surprising. You know, you would think that this is just such a minuscule upgrade over the Mavic 2 Pro, but it's really not. Performance-wise, OcuSync 2 is just as great on the standard controller, and I will say, getting a chance to use the Pro controller, holy shit, that thing is amazing. The frames per second coming back down to the RC looks absolutely stunning. It blows my mind. I can't wait to get my Pro controller in hand officially. I was using a friend's Pro controller the other night, and it just blew my mind. I absolutely love it. I also love how light it is, and that could be a whole separate video in itself. But performance-wise, I didn't suffer any major issues with this, except for when I was flying under some power lines. I kept getting some random disconnects at about 500 feet. And once I moved away from the power lines, I no longer had that issue. So that could have just been interference from those high voltage power lines when we were way up in the mountain. But as soon as I moved to another location, I no longer suffered any sort of disconnects. As far as how it flies and handles the wind is incredible. Even in high winds up to 20 miles per hour with gusts gusting up to 30, this drone held its own. Not once did I fear that this was going to smash the ground and leave me empty-handed when I was in the mountains. Not one time did I fear that. It always was able to make it back to me and land safely, and that's all you can ask for anytime you plug a battery into a drone and you fly it away. So it flies incredibly well. Another thing that I love about DJI drones is the fact that the yaw and the expo is just perfectly cinematic, and the fact that they give you that option to flip it over to Cine mode to get some quickly dialed in rates is perfect. I really cannot complain whatsoever about it. It just did its thing. However, a couple of times when trying to move forwards or backwards quickly, I did notice the gimbal was struggling a little bit and would flip down or flip backwards. So they still have that problem where you can't like pitch all the way forward with the gimbal straight up. It's still gonna flop down on you. That I just think is, you know, unfortunately just something we're gonna have to deal with how big it is. But ultimately it performed incredibly well in that regard. As far as the obstacle avoidance goes, I am still undecided on the obstacle avoidance. I'm not convinced 100% that the crash was the drone's fault. I think that was mostly pilot error. But from what I've seen, and others in the space have been crashing these as well, I don't know if it's a matter of, are we pushing these harder than they are capable of doing? Or do we just need to wait for that update in January when OcuSync or ActiveTrack 5.0 is finally available? I'm not really sure what the answer is. I know DJI demoed some pretty impressive things in that video, and I know that I have seen some impressive things from others that do have the beta software. However, with that said, it's not that I don't trust the obstacle avoidance, I just wouldn't rely on it. And not a single person should ever rely on obstacle avoidance 100%, unless if you're using a Skydio, and then at that point, then you're just, that thing's in God mode at that point. But this is good. It's a great step in the right direction, but we'll have to revisit that when I keep wanting to call it OcuSync. ActiveTrack 5.0 is officially available in January. So, but yeah, I mean, performance-wise, motors didn't really get hot, didn't struggle in the wind. and the OcuSync was amazing. So I really have zero complaints as far as a performance perspective of this drone. And there was no latency that could be found in the camera and in the video stream. So that's something that I'm really stressing about recently is latency in these videos, because a lot of drones I've noticed do have a latency factor. So that's something to keep in mind. Now, the controller that I have been using with that is the standard RC. This is the standard Flymore package. I have been using my Triple Tech tablet with this, and I haven't had any problems with the Mavic 3 and the Triple Tech. It's actually been a really good combo for me. This is the setup that I brought with me to Hawaii. I'm using my minimal amount, and I also am using that with my lanyard, which allows me to just clip a lanyard to this and basically, you know, have it hands-free. It works really quite well. Links are in the description below. Shameless plug. These are fucking amazing. If you already haven't bought yourself one, they are awesome if you're planning on using a Triple Tech tablet. I know this is not a performance characteristic, but I do want to take a moment to talk about this thing here. This is the, I guess, the gimbal cover. I don't know if it's a gimbal cover or, I mean, I could use this as a crotch guard. I mean, this could be a crotch guard. Or, I mean, if I was role playing, I could.
Nobody. What does it matter who I am? Nobody knew who I was until I put on the mask.
I mean, you can do a lot of things with this beyond just using it as a gimbal guard. It is a weird design, but it is highly functional. And that's all I'm going to say about that as far as performance goes. Multifunctional. Thank you, DJI, for this. I like this little thing, even though I don't like it. Let's talk about image quality. Now for what you've probably been waiting for, which is the image quality. And I will tell you that the Mavic 3 does not disappoint when it comes to image quality. This thing far exceeds my expectations, and it's probably one of the reasons why I was so critical when I was reviewing the X Dynamics Evolve. See, I had already gotten a chance to see footage from the Mavic 3 while I was reviewing that drone, and understanding that this is a $2,100 unit and seeing what they were bringing to the table for $3,600, it skewed my review, because I was like, holy shit, $3,600, $2,100. Fuck you. Yes. Here's some footage that I've shot over the past 4 weeks with this drone. Alrighty, so as you can see from those clips, I think they came out just absolutely phenomenal. And for the vast majority of those clips, I just shot them in the standard Hasselblad color profile. Now, I've always shot on the Mavic 2 Pro and the Air 2S in D-Log, but with the Hasselblad color science and the dynamic range on the Mavic 3, I just found myself using the standard profile. It was a neutral starting point. It looked good. You can expand upon it a little bit if you want it, throw in some sharpness, and you have an incredible image. Now, I will say, with all things considering, the main camera does absolutely phenomenal. Now, the Explorer mode using the zoom lens, I used it periodically to scope things out, but it's just not something that I'm going to focus on in this video because I didn't use it enough and I didn't feel like the camera quality was all that great out of that. Honestly, I could do without that secondary camera, and they could have even put more tech into this main camera and I would have been perfectly fine. Yes, the Explorer mode does work and you can, sort of line up shots and see things from afar away. And in a pinch, you can get some cool shots with it, but it's, again, not something I would use for my main shooter. Now, the lens field of view is incredibly wide. It makes everything feel like it's far away, even though you're so close. It's incredible. And the craziest thing is they have an attachment for a wider angle lens, which blows my mind because how much wider would you really want this? That's pretty incredible as it is. Nighttime images look, oh my gosh. The nighttime shots are easily the best that I've ever shot with this. So, I hate to keep making comparisons, but when we start talking about micro four thirds sensors and we looked at the footage that I got from the Evolve, I want you to take note of the reds and blues, how washed out they were on that drone. It has a hard time with colors at night, while the DJI was able to keep a natural looking image and just make the reds pop and the blues look blue. And it just had very, very low noise in the sensor. Shooting at the standard H.265, I think it did absolutely phenomenal at night. And I have no complaints. I cannot complain about it. Photos that I've taken with this look crisp, look sharp. It's hard to get a bad image out of this drone straight out of the gate. It really is hard to get a bad image out of this drone. You just can't. It's super hard to. But there is some limitations with this drone, and primarily when you are shooting in D-Log. D-Log on this is locked at 400 ISO and 800 ISO. Now, my theory on that is the fact that we have two native ISOs. We have a 400 native ISO and an 800 native ISO in D-Log. And the reason being that they're locking that is for the best noise performance, you're going to lock it to those ISOs so you don't get color shift and or immense amounts of noise in your video. Now, using the D-Log footage, I noticed that I was able to push and pull the colors quite substantially and also had a lot of room for recovery. However, I noticed if I overexposed by 2 stops, it was almost too much. So with this drone, I would say overexpose by 1 stop and you're gonna have enough of flexibility to get your colors exactly where they should be. Now, DJI does have a technical LUT that you can download directly from their website. I myself find the LUT to be okay. However, I am working on my own LUT that I feel is a little bit more color accurate based upon some things that I have seen. Now, I am using color charts to develop this LUT, so it's going to be 100% accurate once I get it all ready and complete. So look out for that in the coming weeks. I did the same thing with the Evo, but the Evo had far many more issues than this does straight out of the gate. But overall, I think the images just speak for themselves, and it's going to be the reason why so many purchase this drone. All right, with that being said, let's talk to price to value and whether or not you should buy this based upon everything I've said. Okay, so here's the conclusion. Should you buy the Mavic 3? Well, if you need a drone and you absolutely want the best possible drone, then yes, the Mavic 3 is absolutely for you. But if you're somebody who flies super casually and doesn't fly enough daily, I would say the Air 2S is still going to be your best fit option. Now, this thing does some amazing things, but none of the things that it does is going to be life-altering or it's not going to make your footage better. Again, you behind the camera pressing the buttons, and what you do in post is going to dictate those images. So if you like what you saw out of the camera today, keep in mind, that's me lining up the perfect shot. That's me doing what I can in camera to get the best possible performance out of the sensor. And that goes for all the YouTube videos that you watch. Every one of these guys that have filmed and shown you about this Mavic 3 has done everything they could to try to put it in the best situation to win. Obviously, you want to make sure when you're shooting something, you're getting the best possible image. And this does it 90% of the time. And then there's that, I don't know, 10% where I'm just like, what the hell did that do? Why wasn't it in focus? So it's not perfect and it's not finished. So to call this video, I guess, a review isn't really fair because this drone isn't finished. And I would probably say if you're somebody who's on the fence, why don't you wait until January before you purchase it? That way you can make a definitive decision once you see all the software updates and firmware updates fully available, because there are some things that I'm still clicking on that says feature not available as of yet. So that's a bit of a bummer. A couple of things that we need to see DJI add to this is a preview LUT. So when you are using D-Log, you can actually see the image before it's graded in post. I think that would be super helpful. That burned me a few times over the past week, not having a preview LUT to see my exposure officially. I would love to see something like that available, or the option to sync our own LUTs directly to the DJI app. After all, this is the most professional foldable camera that's on the market today. I think you should give us professional options in that regard. Now, there's a lot of other things that I probably missed in this video, but knowing me, I still like to do month-to-month and long-term reviews and updates, so I will be communicating my experience with this as it goes. So every time I have an issue or I notice something new, I'll communicate it with you. So if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button if you can handle an asshole like myself telling you about a drone like this. So there you go. All right. But if you are somebody who's super impatient and you want to have the best of the best, I'll have a link down in the description below where you can get one of these today that are shipping directly from my store, DroneWorks. Help me support you, support me, support us. Just click the links below if you want any of the shit that we talked about. No pressure. But don't buy from B&H or Amazon. No, I'm kidding. Buy from wherever the fuck you want. I really don't care. I don't care. My rent will be paid tomorrow. I pay my rent in likes. That's why it's always late. Alrighty, that's going to do it for this video. If you enjoyed, be sure you stay original.
I heard they checking for me, no one checking on me, so I had to go run up a check. I got the message on me, ain't no flexing on me, my attorney gon' call and collect. Blessings on blessings for me, my successes only made them envious, they got upset. I had to put all their egos in check. I want the money to